Smalls. I suppose you don't even know who the babe is either. It's plug. What? Chewing tobacco?
Tobacco, man.
What do you do with it? You're killing me, Smalls.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and this week there was a comic called, I think it's Gotham Future State or Future State Gotham, one or the other. If you've been watching the channel, you know I'm not interested in Future State. That's why I'm not reading the Batman comics. I'm reading the Superman stuff because it feels like maybe that's going to go somewhere, but like the Teen Titans Academy, a lot of that stuff, it's just not for me. I'm reading the Green Lantern because the Future State Green Lantern had more potential. But for the most part, I'm out of Future State. I haven't been interested in it for quite some time. So this series literally had no draw for me. I was not interested in reading it. Even though it stars Jason Todd Red Hood, one of my favorite characters. It's in probably my favorite DC setting, Gotham. And it's written by Joshua Williamson. Is he the best writer at DC Comics? If he's not, he's in the top 2 or 3. He's up there. He's one of the writers at DC you can really count on. That writes there regularly, that's going to deliver a really good, solid story, normally quite true to the characters. Why am I making a video talking about it today? So I saw some people posting online art, specifically a guy named Rick. I follow him on Twitter. He's a good guy, pretty funny. He's not the Twitter follow for everybody, but for me, I think he's pretty good. He was posting some of the art. When I saw it, I was like, you are yanking my dick. There's no way that DC Comics... This can't be the art in a DC comic book. And it appears that they are trying to produce some DC comics with manga-inspired or manga-style art. It's missing a lot of what makes manga terrific. I've heard some Western comic readers, American comic readers say, manga art's like basic. We're looking at different manga art, but if this is the kind of art that you were looking at, you would come to that conclusion because it is very basic. And I think we're going to see a lot of these attempts from Marvel and DC in the future. It's hard to say they're getting annihilated by manga. They're certainly getting beaten with graphic novels and trades, and in the book market, not so much in the direct market, but it's a different animal. But it's not like every volume of manga is being released in America. They're curating and picking the best things that sell the best, that have the biggest audience, that probably have the best adapted anime, and probably have the most appeal to Western comic audiences. Perch actually did a video on this a couple days ago. It's actually really good. If you haven't checked that out, definitely do. I'll put a link in the video description, and also there'll be a link in the video here somewhere. So I think we're going to see Marvel. They've just signed a deal with Viz Media. They're going to be bringing that Deadpool Samurai over. They'll be adapting a few other things like Marvel properties for manga to be distributed over here in the U.S. And DC Comics has also done manga in the past. We've seen Batman manga. We've seen some Batman anime type things. But if this is the way that they're going to if this art here is how they're going to draw like the manga art audience, it's not going to work because this is bad art. If you look at it right here, this is as basic gets. Manga, for the most part, at least the stuff that I've read that's really popular, is exceptionally detailed. There's almost no details in this art by, I think it's Giannis Milianis, at all. It almost looks unfinished, as if it needed an inker or someone to go over it and finish the art. There's no depth or clarity to these images. And that's one of the things that in manga art, typically it's black and white, almost always, is there's almost like a texture that's created through the art style that brings the character's life. A lot of times that's added in American comics through the inking process, but a lot of times through colors. When you don't have a color palette applied to it to create depth and really distinguish the action and the figures, you have to use a few other tricks of the trade as far as the shading, like grayscale color designs, and a lot of times the inking itself to give it really that depth and clarity. And there's often just a ton of really cool, fascinating nice detail within the art. And this does not have that. It's almost embarrassing that DC Comics would put this out, especially, if you look at DC, Sean Gordon Murphy, is he the best known American comic artist that really has a real manga look and feel to what he's doing? He might be. The other artist that really pops into mind when you think about American, comic book artists that are truly inspired by and delivering like American style manga is Jorge Jimenez, the Batman artist that's working with James Tynion. He did some Super Sons, Superman work before this. Really great artist. Heavily influenced by manga. He's got that really badass American manga style. So they have two of the most prolific manga-inspired American comic artists on their brand. And this is what they deliver. It's truly shocking that you would have access to these quality of artists. Now, am I saying that Sean Gordon Murphy or Jorge Jimenez, should have given up their White Knight duties or the regular Batman series to write or to illustrate this Gotham Future State book? No. I'm sure they know somebody. These guys talk. There are other American artists heavily influenced by manga that if they wanted to come in and illustrate this book, probably could have done a really damn good job. Whether it be black and white or colored. Just because you're inspired by manga art does not mean your art has to just be delivered or presented black and white. James and Sean Gordon Murphy and Jorge Jimenez are perfect examples of that. Another one over at Marvel Comics, who we've really known as more of a cover artist this whole time, Peach Momoko. She just did interiors on her own story that she's written. I think it was X-Men Demon Days. We have some more issues coming out. Look great, colored. I think they're use watercolors. I've seen her present some of her art online, or specifically through Twitter, and when she's illustrating, look great. So you can take the things that make manga really cool, the hard edges, the really cool hatchwork, the creating like texture of design within the ink and shading process itself, and incorporate that into U.S. comics. If they're wanting to present a more manga style feel to Western comics, I don't think you have to abandon color. But even if you wanted to do it black and white, do it manga style, you can't have art that looks like this. And I also think DC and Marvel are perhaps, more than likely, they're seeing the symptoms, but they're not diagnosing the issue. They're seeing younger readers moving over to manga. They're seeing manga courting a larger audience year by year and experiencing extreme amounts of growth in the North American comic book market, while they're experiencing the audience is shrinking a bit. Now there are some publishers that are experiencing tremendous growth. Boom Studios comes to mind, but that's not the norm in Western comics. And I think they're seeing this and they're like, well, it must be the art style. That's the most dramatic difference that you can see between an American produced comic book and a manga. Well, the art's different. It's black and white. The art's not as different as you like to think. In some ways, it's more sophisticated. It's told a little bit different. There's a different reading order, and typically the pages are smaller. So that the visual storytelling is a little bit different. But there's massive differences that go well beyond the fact that the art's black and white. So I think they might be diagnosing, or they're seeing the symptoms, but they're not really diagnosing the problem. One of the big differences is mostly it's character-driven storytelling. What can we do to highlight this character or put them through a trial or test, overcome it, and become a better, more fully fleshed out character in the end? It doesn't feel like Western comics are doing that all that much. You do see it here and there, but the storytelling quality is, for the most part, you'll hear from a lot of Western readers that have abandoned DC, Marvel, the mainstream comics, and moved over to manga. They say the storytelling is better. Well, they're not exactly adapting that model. We're seeing more and more propaganda, ideology, more, politics have always been in comics. Yeah, I'll admit that. It's always been there, but it's never been this ham-fisted, never been this, slam you over the head type of thing. And for the most part, manga avoids that stuff. And manga is really, really, really diverse, just as far as the genres. There's volleyball manga. Can you imagine DC or Marvel producing a volleyball-inspired comic book? Or even Boom Studios or Image Comics? They're not going to produce stuff like that. And you'll see some of the most wildly entertaining, crazy mangas will be, ping pong manga. Who would have thought? But it's popular over there. So I think the storytelling and the settings and genres that they tackle in manga are much more diverse than what we see it in the North American market. Also, we've talked about this on the channel with Perch and Joe a little bit. It's much easier to get into manga. There's a starting point for every manga. It's volume 1. There's an end point, whatever the last volume that was printed, and you could read the entire story all the way through. Can you imagine trying to read Batman all the way through, like the very beginning of his story until where he is now? What's canon? What's not canon? Well, according to Infinite Frontier, DC Dark Knight's Death Metal, everything's canon. That's a problem. This is a big problem. Now, a lot of readers can just go in there, they pick up a issue of Batman, and be like, you know what, I like this comic book, I'm going to keep going with it. But a lot of readers are intimidated. A lot of potential customers are intimidated. Where's the starting point? If I want to hear the story of Batman, where do I begin? Certainly, Detective Comics 27, Batman #1 are good starting points. But the character that you see now doesn't really even resemble then. But even if you go along, there's all these crossovers that have happened all over these years. Crossover stories bouncing between titles. Let's say you're reading, a detective, next thing it's got a crossover with another title. You don't know about it. You could be missing the end of your big story they've been reading. It's a real headache. And the way that things are collected right now, I'll tell you what, if DC Comics wanted to do themselves an enormous favor, and it would be a huge undertaking, it would probably take a few years. And it would be very hard to find the people qualified to do it, to find the time. They need to make definitive editions. What's the definitive Batman? Detective Comics, Batman, any type of miniseries, anything that's canonically Batman. Start collecting it, volume 1, and going all the way through to where somebody wanted to read the story of Batman from beginning until where we are now, because it's never going to end. This is where you'd start. You start at volume 1. We're on volume 400 right now. It would probably be that many. But they need probably to fix that, the way that the stories are collected. What do we know is even canon? You see that? Remember that spreadsheet that Dan Didio had out for the new timeline of DC Comics and trying to make heads or tails of everything? An absolute nightmare. Just to do it for the entire DC universe. They need to get down into the characters. If I want to read the story of Hawkman, where do I start? Where do I end? Now, that would be a little bit easier for Hawkman because he's been published less. But even then, he's been in Justice Society of America. He's been part of the Justice League. He's been in a lot of different titles. What's part of Hawkman's story that you need to read? If I want to read the story of Barry Allen Flash, where do I start? Where am I at now? And it would take a long time. It would be a huge undertaking. But I think that they would find less barriers of entry for new readers if they knew where to begin. Or maybe if you separated them into eras. This is the story of Golden Age Batman. This is the story of Silver Age Batman. This is Bronze Age Batman. And just, Golden Age Batman has 15 volumes. Here, 1 to 15. If you want to know the story of the Golden Age Batman, here it is. You want to know the story of the Silver Age Batman, you can break them into eras and treat them almost like separate characters in different stories that have a beginning and a clear-cut end. It would be nice if you could pick up a Batman book and think that you were going to get to the end of a story, or a Superman book, or Wonder Woman, or some of these really big, defining characters. And I think DC and Marvel are missing out on the bigger picture. The bigger inhibitors, the things that people are really walking away from, has a lot more to do with price, has a lot more to do with the quality of the storytelling, has a lot more to do with the forcing in of current worldviews and current situations. These things need to be timeless. Sure, you can tackle a current event or situation now and again that's relevant, but if that's what you're doing all the time, eventually it's off-putting. Entertainment's escapism, and people need to be able to escape into these stories. And I don't think the attraction for Western comic readers to manga is the black and white art style, or the way that they lay out some of their comic books. For some readers, it most definitely is. They prefer that style as far as art. But I think if DC and Marvel were producing stories that were more true to the character, putting the character up front rather than the message, the writer's message, not, you know what I mean? Not the message of the character or the intention of the character. They started putting those things first. People would recognize that. And you would see people reading manga, and coming over to Western comics. Maybe they would fall in love, because there's a lot of stuff. There are a lot of things about Western comic art that I think that are superior to manga. And then there are things that manga does as far as art that are superior to Western comics. But I think it's really the big divide right now. It's storytelling, it's collectability, it's entry point, and it's also the other media sources are very true to what the manga is. If you go and watch a lot of these animes that are inspired by manga, you can continue the story in your manga almost uninterrupted. Like, you can jump right in there and you're reading the same story. If you go and read Infinity Gauntlet, and you see the movies that Marvel put out, they're not all that close. They're certainly inspired by it, but it's not the same story. It's very different. So if you wanted to watch Infinity War Endgame and then go pick up where Avengers left off as far as Infinity Gauntlet, the next issue, you'd be completely lost. It's a completely different story. And I think the synergy between mediums is also a big issue in the collectability. So I think that DC and Marvel are going to be trying to attach themselves to this manga market by trying to imitate the manga art style. And I think they're completely missing the boat. And this DC Future State Gotham comic book is a clear indication that they don't know what they're doing. This is not what manga fans want. That art is really bad. And I just think they're missing the boat. And that's the video today. I've heard that the audio is better. If the audio is better, please let me know in the comments section. I've been working very hard to improve the audio. I've added some post-processing filters. I've changed the placement of my mic, and I think I'm almost there. But just let me know if the audio is better. I would very much appreciate that. And I'll see you all later. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.